Good morning. The Hearing Board of the South Coast Air Quality Management District is in session. Today is Tuesday, June 11th, 2019. The time is just after 9 o'clock a.m., and we are meeting in the Hearing Board room in Diamond Bar. We have one matter and a training on the calendar for today, and the matter I will call now, which is Air Liquide Large Industries, U.S. LP, case number 5705-8, for an interim variance. And who is representing Air Liquide this morning?
John Allen is counsel for Air Liquide. Does that work? John Allen for Air Liquide.
Thank you. And I know we've seen you many times before, Mr. Allen, but could you spell your name for the record?
Yes, John, last name Allen. Law firm is Allen Matkins.
Thank you very much. And who is representing the executive officer today?
Good morning. Brian Tomasovic, Senior Deputy District Counsel, representing the Executive Officer.
Thank you. Before we begin, a couple things. First of all, I will swear in witnesses. If anyone wishes to testify or be heard today, if you can please rise to be sworn in. Please raise your right hand. Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Also, we received several documents from, I believe, petitioner. So let's mark them at this time. First of all, we received a large schematic, and let's mark that as exhibit number 1. We received several photographs. Try to mark those as individually as I can. The first we received, I'm sorry.
Chair Prusak, if you want, I could assist in the order of the presentation of those photos. It might help.
Okay.
If you just show them to me.
The one we got on top was.
Yeah, that's the first.
Okay. It looks it looks like a piece of pipe with some
indeed
debris down at the bottom. So we'll mark that as exhibit 2. And then I assume this would be the second.
Correct.
Okay. We also received a photograph of pipe, and it seems that there's been some fixing or mending done to the pipe, and that will be exhibit 3.
Yes.
And then we have 2 photographs that are stapled together, which I assume is a clamp.
Correct.
Okay, and so we will mark those 2 together as exhibit 4. And then finally, we received 2 pages from Air Liquide's permit, and we will mark those together, unless you'd like them separately marked.
No, that's
Okay,
fine.
we'll mark them together as exhibit number 5. And with that, we are going to begin by bifurcating the hearing today so that we can first determine whether there is good cause to proceed with the merits of this matter in absence of notice to the public, since it is for an interim variance and there has been no notice. So, Mr. Allen, are you prepared to have an opening on good cause? Would you like to have me go over what is required for good cause?
Well, for the benefit of the petitioner, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Thank you.
That would be great. There are a few questions on a slide we have prepared that you can answer during the hearing. And in addition, I'll let you know generally what we are looking for. First of all, we need to know that you are either in violation of a rule or regulation or permit condition, or that violation is imminent. Second is that the circumstances that led to that violation could not have been avoided or anticipated in sufficient time to provide for public notice, very much like beyond reasonable control. Third is that there was diligence in petitioning for the interim variance and scheduling the hearing as soon as petitioner knew or should have known that it was more likely than not a variance would be needed. And finally, what would be the impact were we to have to wait for a short variance, which is what you've also requested, and for that notice period, which is approximately 21 days. Is that correct, Madam Clerk? Approximately 21 days. So, Mr. Allen, if we could just begin and have the first part of the hearing try to just address those particular points And then we would deliberate and then determine whether to move on to the merits.
Okay.
Okay, so your opening, if you could.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Essentially, we're here today seeking an interim variance on behalf of Air Liquide as a result of an event which they discovered in the normal course of their inspections involving the V107 vent line. That's Exhibit A is a photo of the V107 vent line in relevant part. If you can direct your attention to it, you'll see it appears rather large. In fact, it's 4 inches in diameter. It's the gray element in the upper right portion of that photograph. The beige or off-white portion is what's called the dead leg. If you look where the...
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but just if we could refer to it, it's been marked as Exhibit 2.
Oh, I'm sorry.
For all of those
Yeah, what did
who
I
are
say?
following.
It's 2. Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
It was A in my mind this morning. It's 2. And what you'll observe there is a darkened area from where the beige dead leg butts up against the gray V107 vent line. That line is 4 inches in diameter. It goes for hundreds of yards. It's well above the ground, but it's a 4-inch diameter. Think of it as a bent piece of elbow macaroni. The dead leg, which adheres to it, there's a dark spot there. It almost looks like blood, if you can see it. That's the leak that was observed during a routine inspection, one of 2 conducted every day. And that was immediately reported to the district, and a consultant Colt group was summoned to deal with that leak. When they arrived and looked, they noticed a similar leak on the other side of that dead leg. You can't see it in the photo, but it's on the other side of that 2-inch diameter beige, light brown segment of pipe that is stuck on the side of the 4-inch vent line. So that leak is a failure of the equipment. It had to be dealt with. Rule 1173G in its Table 1 requires repairs be completed within 24 hours. It isn't possible, or wasn't possible, to complete an effective repair of that particular leak to the ultimate confidence of the petitioner. What they did in lieu of that, and what they want to do now later, but the interim measure that they undertook was petitioner's Exhibit 4. If you'll pull that up, you'll see more clearly the 4-inch line, and you'll also see the dead leg, and they applied an epoxy around it. They, petitioner and Colt Group, Inc., the contractor, installed that. And Exhibit 3.
Exhibit 3.
I've got to remember that. Exhibit 3 will show you the epoxy there, and again, you can see the relative position of the 2, the 4-inch diameter and the 2-inch dead leg. This fix is still there. It's still working. It's still being monitoring. However, petitioner and its contractor both feel that it needs to be replaced with a more robust, effective, and permanent type of fix, and that leads us to Exhibit 4. If you'll look at Exhibit 4, which consists of 2 pictures, this is what they ordered to have manufactured, designed, fabricated, and has arrived at the facility and is now ready for installation. This is a major league clamp that will be put in place on Exhibit 3, the 4-inch diameter line, once the dead leg is cut off. So there's room to apply this clamp. And you can see from Exhibit 4, the first photograph and then the second photograph, it's a 2-piece unit that clamps on, and I'm going to physically demonstrate with my hands here. It just goes over that 4-inch V4 line and then is bolted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12 bolts. And it's heavy. I tried to lift it. It weighs 200 pounds. Cost about $12,000 or $13,000. It's going to be hoisted up into place after the dead leg is cut off, as depicted on Exhibit 3. When that is cut off, it will go right over both sides of the V4 vent line and prevent any further future leaks. In order to do that, there's going to be a period of time, minimum probably 8 hours, maximum probably 24 hours, during which the V4 vent line will vent directly to atmospheric, which is not what the permit allows. The permit requires the V14 vent line vent to the H101 furnace. So we're going to need relief for the period of time necessary to put this clamp on the V104 line. The other thing is, when it's venting and not going to the furnace, it will exceed the VOC limit in the permit. And again, I've given you this section of the permit section. We have a 0.5 total VOC limit under the permit as it's presently written. So we're going to need relief from those specific provisions, as well as obviously Rule 1173G dealing with the repair, as well as the general Rule 2004 F1 requiring compliance with all rules and permit conditions. That's sort of the catch-all language, Rule 3002E, et cetera. So that's the basis for the petition. Relief in order to install a clamp as a permanent fix to what is now a temporary fix that is holding. However, we want the confidence and the assurance of a permanent fix, and that's the purpose of the variance.
Thank you. Mr. Allen, I noticed you stood to be sworn in. Did you want to also serve as a witness?
I don't know that I will, but in the event questions are asked, I always found it, and it's been my pattern in practice to always stand up and take the oath.
Okay.
If that facilitates testimony, fine.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Tomasovic, you're opening on good cause.
The district will reserve its position on good cause until after hearing from Air Liquide's witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you. As I turn it back to you, Mr. Allen, to bring on your witness, one thing we would really need to understand is the time frame between when this occurred and when you filed and for a variance relief. So time frame would be helpful. And also, if you could focus on the fact that there is an imminent violation and why it is that you cannot wait until this matter is scheduled and noticed for a short variance hearing.
Yeah, let me initially say that we did call the clerk on May 24th or shortly thereafter and request an ex parte, and the advice we received was to apply for an interim, and that's why we did what we did. But I'll at this point, call my first witness, my only witness, and we can proceed with testimony, and then take questions from you that will focus on your inquiry there with respect to the sequence of events and the time frame. Okay? Please state and spell your name.
Quentin Cox, Quinton, first name, last name Cox, COX.
And are you testifying under oath?
Yes.
And where are you employed?
Air Liquide.
How long have you been there?
I've been there, Air Liquide, for about 3 years.
And how long have you been assigned to the El Segundo SMR? I refer to it as the synthetic methane reformer. Is that the correct?
Oh, it's steam methanation reform.
Okay.
And I've been here since July 2018, so roughly a year at this point.
Okay. And who's the plant manager these days?
So our plant manager recently had left the company. So right now we do have our zone director, Robert Torres, who is sitting behind me. And I am still remaining as the plant engineer at the facility.
And just briefly, your background, your education, technical skills.
Yes, I received a BS in chemical engineering from Rice University, located in Houston, Texas. And yeah.
And are you generally familiar with the type of equipment present and its operating history?
Yes.
Okay. Just very briefly, because I believe most of the board is familiar with the SMR or the H2 plant. Can you just briefly describe what it does and for whom it does it?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So SMR, steam methanation reformer, in the big scheme of things, we take methane, CH4, and mix it with steam, H2O, and through a furnace, we're able to produce hydrogen. That is our main product. We send hydrogen directly to Chevron, and we also send steam directly to Chevron. Chevron is our only customer, so all of our product goes directly to them.
And are you a major supplier of hydrogen and steam for Chevron?
Yes, we are the main supplier of high purity hydrogen. So beyond 99%, hydrogen is sent to Chevron, who is responsible for roughly 60% of the high purity hydrogen that goes to Chevron. So we are their main supplier.
And again, briefly for the board's edification and background, what's the role of the V107 vent line, the V107 with respect to the SMR plant and its hydrogen manufacturing function?
Okay. Sorry, the V107 can be called a deaerator or a degasifier. And so basically we receive demineralized water from Chevron. And in this water, there may contain dissolved gases such as oxygen, carbon dioxide, which if left in the system could lead to corrosion in the piping, which is obviously a bad thing. And so we send steam to the degasifier, which removes the dissolved gases. So it removes the oxygen and CO2 from the demon water that is sent to us. There is also the potential for VOCs, mainly methanol, in the stream, which is why the vent line, which is sent to the furnace to be thermally destructed. So this vent line is about 4-inch piping. It is made out of 410 stainless steel. It is all above ground. It is sent from the vessel all the way to the reformer to, like I said, be thermally destructed.
And I'm going to show you a document which we have marked as Exhibit 5, if I've got my numbers straight at last, and ask you if you can at least identify and explain to the board, where is the V107, where is the V107 vent line?
Yeah, so the V107 itself, it is elevated in air. I would say it's roughly, oh, I'm sorry, Exhibit 1.
Oh, no, it's Exhibit 5. Oh, it's 1. I can't. boy,
Schematic is
I'm
Exhibit
sorry.
1.
Yeah, this morning I numbered them all in a different order, and unfortunately they're renumbered now. So 1 is the P and ID. We'll just call it Exhibit 1. Thank you.
Yes, it might be easier if you want to come over to, there's a projector over here, and we
Oh, that's
can
great. An overhead.
set it up, but if you can also take the microphone, put it on, and just kind of pull it to you so we can also hear you as well.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
Okay, this is neat. Okay. Okay, can you all hear me? Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, perfect. So as you can see here, this is a V107 or a degasifier. This itself vessel is elevated in air. I would say it's roughly 30 to 40 feet in air. And as you can see at the top, we have a line that exits the top. And what we're proposing is that if we're given an opportunity, we would vent out here where it says vent to a safe location. I would say this is about 5 to 10 feet above the vessel in of itself. But what normally happens in normal operation, this the vent gas that's in the vent line travels here, and it travels here, and it continues on, and it's going to be really hard to see. But on that arrow, it says 2H101, which is our coding for the reformer or the furnace.
And that it would be destroyed there normally.
Yes.
What's the composition of this aerator gas as best you can determine?
Yeah, so it's 95% or plus of water or steam, and as I mentioned earlier, there's also some oxygen, some carbon dioxide, and potentially methanol.
And how has the V107 line performed based on your review and your experience?
Oh yeah, the V107. So it was first put in place in 2009. And in 2015, we did a full replacement of the vent line with 410 stainless steel. It's a more robust material, and we did this change in the hopes that it would increase the durability of the line in and of itself. And so beyond this leak on this 410 stainless steel, we have had no other leaks on the 410 stainless steel. And so in my experience, it has performed pretty well.
Okay, thank you. I think you can return.
Yes, you can return if you, thank you very much for
I didn't realize.
demonstrating that.
Okay, no worries.
And what sort of monitoring and maintenance regimen does the V107 and the V107 line receive?
Twice a day, or I would say once per shift, we do have our operators. They do outside rounds, so where they do monitor the unit. And so I guess based on that, you could say that the V107 is inspected at least twice per day.
And are you familiar with the variance petition?
Yes, I'm the one that prepared it.
Okay. And why are you seeking the variance here?
So we are seeking a variance. So on May 23rd, 2019, during one of our normal operator rounds, our operator at the time discovered the leak. Shortly after that, we did call AQMD to notify them of the leak and the potential release of VOCs. And shortly after that, we did contact Colt, who is our third-party contractor, who we normally contact whenever we discover any potential leaks or active leaks at our site. They came out to our site shortly after that and determined that just based on the location, since it is on an elbow, and also due to the fact that there was a crack, that they would need to do, I guess, a two-phase fix. First phase would be to install the epoxy over the leak itself. It's in order to meet our 24-hour time limit that we have due to our permit conditions. And then, and after that, we would engineer a clamp to be installed over the leak.
So Exhibit 3, again, pardon me if I've got my numbers wrong, Exhibit 3 shows the temporary fix, is that correct?
Yes.
And was that done by petitioner or by Colt Group?
That was done by co-group. It was suggested by the co-group. And we internally, with Air Liquide, I guess you can say MOC approvers and SMEs, we did approve that temporary fix.
Yeah, you're using a lot of abbreviations there. What is
Yes.
an MOC and what is an SME?
Okay, good point. I'm sorry about that. SME is a subject matter expert. MOC is management of change. And we are a PSM plant, process safety management, meaning that whenever we do any changes to the process or to the plant in and of itself, we do have to go through a management of change process so that we do get approval to make any changes to our plant.
And why is it you need this variance on an interim basis now?
Yes, so the epoxy was only meant to be a temporary fix, as I mentioned, a two-phase. And the first phase was to install an epoxy, but we, along with Colt, do not feel comfortable enough that this epoxy will hold until we can actually replace the piping, which will most likely happen during our turnaround, which is scheduled with Chevron in 2021. So the ideal was to install the epoxy to meet our 24-hour time limit while the engineered clamp was being fabricated and made. And we need the variance because we have to take this vent line out of service because we're going to be cutting the dead leg open.
So were you able to meet the 24-hour time interval to apply the epoxy?
Yeah, so we did unfortunately exceed the 24-hour limit by 4 hours, so it took 28 hours. But at this very moment, the epoxy is holding. The leak has been stopped. We are not having any excess emissions at this moment.
Now, why didn't you have a spare clamp available to install at the time? That's a question that would logically come to the mind of a third party.
Absolutely. So this clamp is custom made, it's custom built, and a lot of clamps that we have at our site are custom made, meaning that Colt has to take the geometry of the piping in and of itself, the pressures, the temperatures, the process that's actually going through the pipe, and they have to go through their engineers on their side, and they actually perform calculations for us to build the clamp in and of itself. So it is a custom item. It's not something that's on the shelf. It's not something that we could go to a store or a facility to actually get.
Okay, and the clamp, which again, I believe is depicted on Exhibit 4, I think that's the two photos, that has in fact been ordered?
Yes, it has been in fact been ordered. It is at our site at this very moment. It is just waiting to be installed. So that is the goal of this variance. If it were granted, we would call Colt immediately and get that immediately scheduled to be put into place.
And how long do you need the variance to remain in effect if it's granted?
If it's granted, we would like the variance to remain in place until June 14th. But we do feel that if everything goes according to plan, we will only be taking the V107 vent line out of service for roughly 8 to 10 hours.
Okay. And why do you feel that the variance is needed? You're currently in compliance. What makes you think you will not be in compliance?
Yeah, so without the variance, we do feel that the epoxy may not hold long enough. And if that were to occur, additional leaks would happen if we were not given the variance to actually install a clamp over the leak.
And can you install the clamp without being in violation of a permit condition?
No, we cannot. We have explored that option. Not venting the gas into the atmosphere would defeat the whole purpose of the degasifier in and of itself. The dissolved oxygen and carbon dioxide would make its way through the boiler feed water system, ultimately leading to corrosion, which, I mean, will bring on its own issues in that piping.
And if you do cut the dead leg without the variance, will you exceed one or more of your permit conditions?
Yes, we will.
And what are those conditions?
So the conditions, the main one would be if we, I think it's E3361, which we have a 0.5 pound per day VOC limit.
I believe that's Exhibit 5. Again, pardon me on my numbering, but I think that's one of the two, Exhibit 5.
Yes, so based on that and the source test that we have provided due to a testing that was done back in 2014, the amount of emissions would account for roughly 0.08 pounds per hour of VOCs being emitted. And so if you, just based on that, if you times it by 10 hours, you're getting at 0.8 total pounds. And so we would unfortunately exceed that limit.
And
Can I just stop you here, because that was a question I was going to have. Can we just clarify for the record, in the petition, on page, I don't know if the numbers, pages
page 4, I believe.
8, on page 8, oh, sorry, page 8, where you have excess emissions. It's not relevant for, well, it's not relevant for this part of it, but I just want to clarify it while you're talking about it. It says pounds per day.
No, that's,
0.08, that's pounds per hour?
yes.
Okay,
yes,
so
yeah,
we
sorry,
should,
that
we
is
should
a
just
typo.
clarify that on the petition?
Okay,
Okay,
absolutely.
thank you.
Yes.
Just wanted to do that while you were talking about it.
Okay,
Thank you, yes, that's correct. And I was going to ask, are there, what other permit condition, I understand you've scheduled the rules, including the rule that says obey all permit conditions. What other permit condition would be in violation were you to cut the dead leg off and vent?
And so another permit condition would be, I guess, maintaining the V107 vent line. It's, I would say, it's integrity, and we were, like I said, we would run the risk of the V107 vent line failing again in the same location if we were not able to install the clamp.
Does your permit also require that you vent the V107 line only to the H101 heater?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. That is a requirement.
And you're not going to do that if you're going to cut the vent line and vent directly to atmosphere, are you?
Yes, exactly. We are. Yes, we will be violating that condition.
So those are two permit conditions that will clearly be violated in addition to the general requirement of the rule to obey all permit conditions.
Yes, agreed. Yes, I agree.
And can you explain to us why you were not able to foresee and anticipate the one leak on the one side of the dead leg followed by the other leak on the other side of the dead head that was attached, dead leg, sorry, wrong anatomy, the dead leg attached to the V104? Why were you not able to find that until May 23rd?
Yeah, so like I said, we do twice daily inspections and operator rounds. And so we are inspecting this line. Since we did replace this line in 2015, we did not foresee or expect that this line would fail in such a short amount of time. It's only been 4 years in service. It's 410 stainless steel. And we replaced it with in the hopes that it would increase the durability. At first, this line was made out of carbon steel. 410 stainless steel is a more robust material. And so just based on the fact that we did replace it relatively recently, I would say, we did not foresee that this leak would occur.
Okay. And what action did you take with respect to the district upon observing on May 23rd the leak? I know you indicated you reported the variance. What other action did you take with respect to the hearing board or the district?
Oh, yes. So we did, at that time, we did issue a intent to file an ex parte variance at that time. Once we talked to the clerk, they did mention that if we were able to get the epoxy to work and to hold, that we would be able to withdraw that because we would technically be back in compliance. So we did do that. And then beyond that, we are currently right now running at a lower hydrogen production rate. We are at around 80 million scuff per day, 80 million standard cubic feet per day. When we are actually allowed to run at 86 million scuff per day. So technically right now we are running at a lower hydrogen production rate, which is ultimately lowering emissions.
So just to make it perfectly clear, at the moment, you're not emitting in excess of your VOC limits, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And you're not venting from the V107 line anywhere but to the heater.
Yeah, that's correct.
However, in order to effect repairs that will ensure the continued reliability of the V107 line, you will need to violate some permit conditions.
Yes, that's correct.
And again, the general condition to maintain the facility and so forth, you're technically not maintaining the equipment at its optimum condition.
Yes, that's correct.
Can you briefly explain why requiring compliance would be tantamount to the unreasonable taking of property? Why would it be economically damaging to you?
And when you answer this question, the relevant question for this portion of the hearing is, what is the harm if you would to wait for a short variance to be noticed to the public,
Okay. Well,
which is a very short period of time?
Okay, well, I will, I guess, answer your question directly. So, in regards to if we had to wait, there is a potential that the epoxy would fail in that brief amount of time if we were to wait until the short variance hearing. The epoxy was put in place as a temporary stopgap. It was never meant to be, I guess, in place for, I guess, an extended amount of time. The ultimate goal was to install the clamp. So if it were to fail, we would be back in the same situation. We would be releasing VOCs into the atmosphere.
And would you shut down the plant in response?
Most likely we would have to.
And what impact would that have on your relationship with Chevron, or what economic harm would follow?
Yes. So if we were had to halt hydrogen production, that would come at a large economic consequence to not only Air Liquide but to Chevron. We have not actually calculated the exact amount, but it would be in the tune of $250,000 to $500,000 in terms of loss to Air Liquide. Beyond that,
Over what period of time are you talking?
So I'm assuming if we shut down, I would say about 36 hours to 48 hours in terms of shutdown, installing a fix, and then starting up. It takes quite a bit of time to get back up to rates.
For the 250, what the amount of money that you just stated you would be lost, that was in 36 hours?
Oh, it will probably be 36 to 48 hours, and potentially a little bit longer than that, but yes.
But suppose you had to stop production for the period of time required for the hearing on the interim variance, which I believe I heard the chair say 21 days?
Generally, from the time you file,
Yes.
if you're noticing right away, it would take 21 days.
Okay. Well, yeah, 21 days. I don't know exact figures, but it would probably be a lot larger than $500,000. And beyond that, since we are one of the major suppliers to Chevron, there would be an impact on Chevron's side as well. Ultimately, our product is used in the production of motor vehicle fuels and aviation fuels, and so there would be a consequence on that. Most likely, unfortunately, will probably be a rise in the cost of motor vehicle fuels and aviation fuels.
Would there be an offsetting benefit to the environment in lieu of getting this variance, which you're requesting on an interim basis today, to simply shutting down and starting up? Would that be a greater benefit to the environment?
So having to shut down and start up would be a worse benefit to the environment in and of itself. Just for reference, whenever we're doing a normal startup, we release roughly 3 pounds of VOCs, as well as around 5,000 K scuff, 1,000 standard cubic feet of flared gases during that time. And so we feel that in terms of emissions, it would be a lot better option to allow us the time to actually emit the V107 vent line for a short amount of time.
Now, this is a bit difficult, but in order to meet the threshold that the board is required, I will ask you, why is compliance impossible at this time?
So compliance is, I guess you say impossible at this time simply because we cannot install the clamp while the line is in service, simply because we have to cut the dead leg. The dead leg is open to the process. And so, as you know, we cannot work on live pipe. We will need to cut the dead leg in order to install the clamp in and of itself. The dead leg, the weld, we do feel like it is, I should say, compromised. And so installing the clamp over the dead leg as well as the elbow was not necessarily an option for us all. We thought that would actually create more issues. And so we need to cut the dead leg portion of the pipe off to actually install the clamp.
And what is your confidence level in proceeding with the temporary, I'll use the term Band-Aid fix of the epoxy now, as opposed to proceeding with Plan A, the installation of the clamp? How do you feel about that?
I definitely feel a lot better and stronger about installing the clamp. If we were to have to run with the temporary epoxy, I do not feel confident it would last until 2021 when we're planning on actually replacing the pipe.
How about for the duration required for the hearing on the short variance?
And for the hearing on short variance, I believe it could possibly make it to then. It could possibly make it to then, but I cannot make any guarantees on that.
Okay. And again, for the benefit of the board who has to make the requisite findings, why couldn't you anticipate this happening?
We normally, like I said, we normally do outside operator rounds twice per day, once per shift. And during those rounds, we did not notice anything on this V107 vent line. We did not notice any leaks or any signs of corrosion or anything like that. So just based on that, we could not predict. And beyond that, we did, like I said, in 2015, we did replace the entire line with 410 stainless steel. It's supposed to be a more durable material. And based on the fact that it's only been in service for 4 years, we did not anticipate, and I do not believe it's foreseeable that this leak would occur at this particular location.
And again, to the extent it's relevant, what can you do during, assuming we get the interim variance, what will you do to reduce or minimize excess emissions?
Yes, during this time, we will, I guess, a little background. Right now, we are running at a lower hydrogen production rate. As I mentioned, 80 million scuff per day as opposed to our authorized 86 million scuff per day. So during this, if it were granted, during this interim variance, we would remain running at that lower hydrogen production rate.
And have you agreed with the district as to conditions that you would observe in addition to reducing your run rate?
Yes, we have agreed. We have been given the proposed conditions for this variance, and we do agree with all of the items.
Does the board want us to go through the additional findings requisite for the variance with respect to nuisance and prior?
No, not at this time, because we still haven't determined whether we have good cause to proceed.
That was my understanding. All right, well then, I don't believe I have any further questions of the witness.
Thank you. And for the record, we have not introduced or, I think, received the proposed conditions, but we'll wait for that at the proper time. Mr. Tomasovic, do you have questions for Mr. Cox?
Yes, thank you. First, Mr. Cox, does the facility supply hydrogen to any other vendors?
No, it just all of our product goes to Chevron.
And the facility is directly next to the refinery?
Yes, we are within the Chevron refinery complex. So
Is the hydrogen delivered by piping directly into the facility?
By pipeline, yeah. Yep.
And do you recall on May 23rd, from the time that the leak was observed, how long it took you to contact South Coast AQMD?
I'm pretty sure it was within the hour, the initial call that we were required to make.
And by what means did you make contact?
I think we called 1-800-CUT-SMOG. Our operator did. I don't think I was the one that actually called. One of our operators made that call.
And as far as it taking 20 hours to repair the leak, 28 hours to repair the leak, Were you mindful at that time of the 24-hour requirement?
Yes, I was mindful. And they, like I said, they initially started trying to make that fix right after we called them, after we called COPE, and got approval from our MOC, our management of change approvers, that we could actually install the epoxy.
In terms of how the twice daily inspections are conducted, can you help us picture how those work? For example, the equipment is suspended 40-some feet in the air.
Yeah.
So how does an inspector do a line inspection?
Yeah, that's a good point. Basically, we have our operator round sheets, has all the major pieces of equipment at our facility, and operators literally walk around and they're inspecting things like pressure gauges, just generally looking for anything that might look off, I would say. And so I wouldn't say that they necessarily follow every single pipe that's to our facility. That would be unreasonable, but they are looking for any signs of leaks that may be occurring, which is how our operator was able to see this V107 vent line leaking.
Do you know how the leak was first observed in terms of how close the inspector was and how it was observed?
Yeah, so fortunately, this line is steam. You can see steam visibly, and so they were able to look up and they saw the steam escaping, and so that was the first telltale sign that there was a leak.
In terms of the risks posed by the epoxy potentially failing, would you say that poses any kind of safety problem?
I would not say. I think this line itself is expanded far enough in air. I don't believe it will pose a big safety concern. If that were to happen, we would just rope off the area and prevent any plant personnel from getting anywhere close to the steam.
And do you have any estimation of the potential for excess emissions if the epoxy were to fail?
If the epoxy were to fail, I would say I don't have a number off the top of my head, but I know we do use the 0.08. That number would be a lot smaller because you're only emitting from a small crack in and of itself. So maybe you could half that number and use that as a figure.
And as far as there being two spots where leaks were found, approximately how far apart were those leaks?
I would say about 4 to 5 inches. It's on the opposite side, so you can't necessarily see it in the picture, the other crack. But they're on the same weld, if that helps.
Do you know whether the entirety of the line was inspected and tested to ensure that there weren't other corroded sections?
Not the entirety of the line, no.
How often has the epoxy fix been inspected?
Inspected twice per day, so once per shift.
Is that, do personnel get up close to it, or is it more of a remote observation?
It's more of a remote observation, just to see if they did see anything leaking from the epoxy.
I pass the witness.
Thank you. Wanted to clarify a couple things. You are currently not in violation of any rule or regulation, is that correct?
Yes, you are correct.
Okay. I also wanted to just clarify the testimony that you gave. So you testified that this temporary stopgap measure of the epoxy is not going to last, you don't believe, till 2021, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, but as far as lasting until noticed hearing, your testimony was you can't guarantee it, but it will likely hold, is that
It will possibly hold, I would say.
possibly?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
What are because here we are, it was applied May 24th, okay?
Yes.
It's now June 11th. Did you have concerns it would last till now?
I did have slight concerns, I did, but just based on our inspections, it showed no signs that it was going to fail anytime soon. So
If it did fail, could you reapply the epoxy?
we could. Our contractor wasn't necessarily, I guess, didn't feel the most comfortable going with that route, which is why we did the clamp. The clamp was a surefire way that we could run this line until 2021.
Right, but for the short term, if it were to fail, say, next week or the week after that, could epoxy be reapplied?
It possibly could, but I don't want to say for sure. I would rely on Cope's expertise on that matter.
Do you know why this occurred on the 23rd, and then let me just clarify another thing. You testified that the decision to go with the clamp was made on the 24th of May, is that correct? Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, it was decided. It was initially decided as a two-part fix, so yes.
Okay. Do you know why it took until the 31st, which was a week later, to apply for a variance or petition for a variance?
I do not have a particular reason for that.
Okay. There were no concerns that within that week the epoxy could fail?
Not initially, no.
Okay.
I thought it could at least last a week, or even possibly longer than that.
Okay. But you understood that we had to notice a hearing and it would take some time before a hearing could be
So
had?
I will be honest in that respect. I did not know it was going to take, I guess, another week after I made when we initially submitted the variance, I did not know the date was going to be today, June 11th. I thought it was going to be sooner, honestly. But.
Okay. I don't have any other questions. Anyone else have questions on good cause? Mr. Balagopalan and then Ms. Burt.
Mr. Cox, so just to get the dates, on the 23rd was when the operator discovered the leak,
Yes, sir.
and then you notified AQMD, the hotline, you called them on the 23rd itself, right?
Yes, sir.
And then when did you call the hearing board to look at the variance, the clerk of the hearing board?
So I filed the intent to file for an emergency ex parte emergency variance on the 24th.
On the
On
24th.
the 24th. So I think it's a Thursday. I think 24th was a Friday. On that Friday.
And what were you told by?
Can we clarify that? First of all, I wanted to be very careful. The clerk of the board does not generally give advice. The clerk of the board will not be called upon to be a witness for anything that is told, and ultimately it is the responsibility of the petitioner to determine whether or not to petition for any variance. And so, Mr. Balagopalan, if we could be just very careful with your questioning as to anything that might have been said by the clerk, or it's more, what was the question I would have is, what was the initial thought in terms of filing for ex parte relief? Because it sounds to me from what you testified to before that it was because the leak was still occurring.
Yeah, so we would put that in place because at that time we did not think we were going to be able to put the epoxy was going to work at that point in time, and especially within our 24-hour window. So that's why we were applying for the emergency variance, which would mean that we would be emitting, have VOC emissions while we were fabricating the clamp. Fortunately, Code Group was actually to get the epoxy to work, and so that's why we were returned back into compliance and we were not releasing any VOCs. So that was the reasoning behind that.
Okay. And then what was the subsequent date then you actually filed the petition?
This petition, I believe, do you have the?
It's date stamped May 31st.
Yeah,
May 30, okay, so May 31st.
that might have been a Friday.
Madam Chair, I do have some specific question on the leak and so forth, but should I wait till if we go to because we're only looking at good cause at this point, right?
If your questions relate to any of the factors we consider on good cause, then definitely ask it. If it does not, then please hold it.
Okay. Let me ask you about the leak then. You say there's a crack. How long is the crack?
Oh, I would say maybe a third of an inch. It's really small. I would say it's about roughly Yeah, like a third of an inch.
third of an inch. And do you have any, have you since subsequently done a root cause analysis to figure out what caused the crack?
No, we haven't. Usually, with root cause analysis, like in leaks we've had previous in our plant, we usually like to remove the piping and actually do testing on it to actually try to see if it was maybe stress corrosion cracking or, any other causes. But since this line it's going to remain in place until 2021, I can't say we can do a full root cause analysis until we're actually able to test that piece of piping.
So do you have any theory as to, at this point?
I want to say I have no theories at this point. It appears to be some form of corrosion, but I don't want to say for sure.
So you said it's twice a day it's inspected.
Mm-hmm.
So was it a sudden occurrence then if they didn't notice it? And the only way they could tell if there was a crack if they see steam
Yes.
escaping from there,
Yes.
on that, and then you see the rust on the pipe where they get, so they didn't notice, and they have logs where when they say they inspect this line and so forth.
Yes, so yeah, we have outside operator rounds. Yes, and so
Crack then it suddenly appeared?
yes,
based
yeah,
on that?
based on the steam that was visibly seen. Yes.
Now, could there be failure anywhere along the lines further down? If,
There potentially could be. I've gone out personally and like just taking a look at it visually. And you gotta understand this is elevated in air, so it's not necessarily possible to get up really close to portions of it. I would say this particular leak location, we have a scaffold built to it, so that's why we're able to get pictures for you all and you can see up close. But I haven't seen any other signs of this occurring.
okay, the dead leg, can you explain what the dead leg is and what's the consequence in removing that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm not sure when this line was put in 2015, but the dead leg itself is not providing any support. There's nothing attached to it. If you can imagine, it's literally a piece of pipe with a cap on it. There's nothing on the end of it. So removing it will have no consequence on the integrity of the vent line itself.
Do you mind showing us on the slide on the pic? I believe it's exhibit 3, but if you could bring all the exhibits
Yeah.
and then we can.
I just want to make sure, fixes and moving into the future would be more relevant for the second phase of the hearing. Should we get there? Is this relevant to any of the particular findings we need for good cause? Diligence in filing, not reasonably avoidable, or violation?
Yeah, I think probably, I'm just trying to understand, what happened occurred.
Sure,
So
if you believe you need it, then
yeah.
let's go ahead.
If I'm going out of line, just let me know with the question. Actually, if you first go to exhibit number 2 first, and I know it was explained where the crack is, but maybe you can show where exactly the crack is on exhibit number 2.
Yeah, it's visible. Slide it down a little.
Can you please put that mic on? Thank you.
Sorry about that. The leak itself was originating at this location right here.
So the 4-inch diameter pipe, which is that,
Yeah, so the 4-inch diameter pipe is this one at elbows. There's a 90-degree elbow here. It's a close-up picture, so you don't get to see the full bend, but it's a 90-degree elbow, and this is a 4-inch line. So this is the main vent line piping. This piping is the one that goes to the furnace where the contents are thermally destructed.
but the leak is not on that elbow, right?
It's on the well between the dead leg and and the vent line.
And the vent, okay.
Yes.
Then if you go to the next, number 3, so could you point to the dead leg?
Yeah, so the dead leg is still here.
That's the dead leg.
Yeah, that's the dead leg. Yeah, so it's the same angle. This is a little bit zoomed out, so you can kind of get a better idea. There's a flange up here. This is the 90-degree elbow at the vent line piping. And this off-whitish material is the epoxy that was applied.
So that crack is exactly where in that,
I would say if I had to estimate, it's like down here
with
on
the-
this bend. So yeah.
I believe you testified there were two cracks.
Yeah, so yeah, the other crack actually you can't see in this photo. It's on the opposite side, but it's on the same weld that kind of curves like that. The opposite crack itself is smaller than this one.
so it's the connection to the dead leg
Yes, yeah, the connection between the dead leg and the vent line piping.
on
Yes.
the vent line piping?
Yes.
Okay. And you mentioned that subsequent, you've been, the operator's been inspecting this line and has not seen any steam coming from the epoxy.
No, sir.
So you'd say it's holding fairly well right now?
Yeah, it is holding. Code Group, the contractor himself, he applied a lot of this epoxy. So,
Now, I think Ms. Prusak asked this question, so what's the, can you apply more epoxy in the interim until you do the repairs?
honestly, I would need to contact Code again just to see if that's an option. I do understand that if we were able to do that, that could allow us time to get to that short variance. So I don't want to speak for them. I will have to contact Code and verify whether or not that's a possibility.
And just one, on the PNID drawing,
Oh, okay. Let me grab that real quick. Okay.
so where exactly is that elbow? Can you refer to that, what part number or?
Oh, yeah. So this PNID, I'm going to grab the other one.
This is not an exhibit. We can introduce it if you'd like. If it facilitates your deliberations, we can do that.
Well, let's take a look if you want to put
Yeah,
it
I'm
up
not
there. We
sure
can
that-
use it as demonstrative right now, and
yeah.
if any board member wishes to
We
actually
have
have
to-
it,
okay.
we can.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that line that was highlighted on the previous PNID, it ends up here, and it comes, and the leak itself is in this location. So a little further upstream of this temperature transmitter. So down here, I would say.
What's the number, ID number, or what's the number you identified it?
Say it one more time, sorry.
Oh, what's the part number?
The line number right here?
Yeah,
So it says 4-inch VN, which VN, that means non-flammable vent. And then it has like the piping code and spec.
okay,
Yeah.
so we won't see it in this one you gave us.
Yeah, so that one was more so just to show you where the line begins or originates, which it comes from V107, the degasifier. And the actual location is on here, or where the leak is occurring is right here. And as you can see, this line eventually travels up and is sent to the furnace through these injection nozzles. This is where any VOCs are thermally destructed in that line.
Okay, thank you.
And once you're back your seat, I know Ms. Bird had questions.
Just a slight follow-up on the reapplication of epoxy. If the epoxy failed and you could reapply, do you have an additional 24 hours to make that repair, or was that 24 hours just for that initial repair in your permit?
I will have to verify or not, because that is an excellent question. If I'm not sure if the 24-hour clock resets based on if we have another leak in the same exact location on a temporary fix.
Okay. Also, you mentioned that you thought the hearing would be sooner. When were you expecting that you would have replaced this clamp if you thought the hearing was sooner?
I think the original day was by the clamp would be here, and we could have installed it by June 5th.
June 5th. Oh, okay. Have you ever, do you know of epoxy ever being used to repair a line like this before?
Yes, we've used this same epoxy on other leaks we've had. The particular reason why this one is a different case is just due to the geometry of the piping. So if you can imagine, if it was a straight line of piping, what we've done in the past, if we applied the epoxy and put a fiberglass wrap around it, and that provides enough strength to prevent any like potential line separations or the leak from getting much worse. But due to the fact that this is a 90-degree in the orientation, and you can't necessarily wrap it properly.
Okay.
So, but yeah, we have used epoxy, and Coat themselves have mentioned that they've used this epoxy not only at Early Key, but at many other facilities throughout Southern California. So other plants like the Valeros, the Chevrons, the Phillips 66, things of that nature.
So you're saying that you do know of leaks prior with the stainless steel piping, and it was just repaired with epoxy with the fiberglass wrap?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. The lower hydrogen production rate, that's already in place, correct?
Yes.
And so is that in place because it needed to, I mean, why is it in place as opposed to your 86, you're at 80?
Oh, that's a good question. We are dealing with other, I guess you can say, production issues. So that's why we are currently right now at a lower hydrogen production rate. And at this point, Chevron would like 86 from us, and we're doing our best to reach that. But for the time being, yes, we are running at a lower production rate.
Okay, so you're running at a lower production rate because that you're only able to run at a lower production rate right now, not because you're trying to alleviate the production rate.
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned your shutdown and startup and how the VOC emissions would be 3 pounds per day. How long is a shutdown and startup?
Oh, it depends. Like I said, there's two different modes. We can either do a hot startup or a cold startup. Cold startups are much longer. Requires actually heating up the planning of itself. I would say if you were just doing a pure shutdown and startup, let's say, for example, lightning strike. We've dealt with that in the past. Lightning comes, takes our plan down. That would result in a hot startup, and I would say we can actually get back into the pipe within 24 hours. Cold startup, you're looking at more closer to 36 to 48 hours.
Okay. And if, for instance, you did not get this variance and the epoxy didn't hold and you had to do shutdown startup, that would be a cold shutdown startup because you would be down for a period of time.
Yeah, most likely it'll be a cold.
Okay, so
it
it
would
would be
longer.
36 to 48 hours at 3 pounds. No.
Yeah, roughly 3 pounds. Yes,
Okay.
and and that's with the assumption that the fix itself goes according to plan, and we don't run into any other issues.
Okay, thank you very much.
No problem.
Other questions on good cause? Senator?
Corrosion-resistant steel. What's the spec on the blow pressure for the steel?
The pressure you're saying?
Red blow pressure, if it's going to become erupted. So that was not your problem.
No. Well, this pressure in itself in this line is around 4 psi, so it is a low pressure line. If that's what you're asking.
Well, did you reduce the pressure and the temperature as you were installing the epoxy?
No, we did not. So
It was leaking, you continued to operate.
yeah, we did continue to operate.
You're a chemical engineer from Rice, correct?
Yes, sir.
You ever hear of electrolysis?
Electrolysis, yes.
Did you know what intergranular corrosion is all about?
I do not.
Well, when you weld two similar metals together, at the point at which they weld, you have called electrolysis set in, and it's known as intergranular corrosion,
Okay.
where it rusts at that point.
Okay.
And when it rusts, it cracks.
Yeah.
So whenever these guys start trying to find out what the problem is, you say you're going to look into that. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. You testified that somewhere on the 14th, June 14th, you said you have a fix on this problem, although in your petition you said June 3rd.
Yeah. So that's it's part of the reason why. So I submitted the variance thinking that I guess this process a lot quicker in my head. I thought it was going to be, the hearing's going to be sooner. So that date should be the 14th.
So you want the variance to begin today? When should it be completed, the 3rd or the 14th?
Oh, the 14th, yeah.
The 14th, so you amended that section.
Okay. You said I omitted it?
Pardon?
Oh, admitted that section.
You amended it. You
Oh,
changed
amended it? Okay, yes, I'm sorry.
Sorry
Yes,
about
I'm sorry.
that.
Yeah, sorry about that.
All right, well, look at your fix is correctable. When you, because it's a weld joint, and you're coming in with the clamp. Clamp is hard clamp. It appears that it will solve the problem. It's not, it could be considered not a temporary fix, but a permanent fix, the way it looks.
Yeah, the way it looks, but I think it's more so like I guess an internal policy. We don't like to run for extended amounts of time with clamps in place.
So your next shutdown until the year 2021?
Yes. Yeah, that's our next that's our turnaround. That's when our
That's your
turnaround is
turnaround.
scheduled. Yes, sir.
And you anticipating removing the plant at that, the clamp at that time?
Yes, at that time we would replace that pipe and we wouldn't reinstall that dead leg.
And you will install the stainless steel and have a weld at that joint once again?
Not at that particular elbow. There would be no weld there. Like I said, we wouldn't reinstall the dead leg. So you can imagine it just be straight pipe, and then we will weld most likely at either a straight portion of
Straight
pipe.
pipe, but it goes up to the tank.
I'm afraid we're veering into the merits and the fix for the situation when we're still on good cause to hold a hearing.
Well, then we leave on the table until we can have a further discussion on this, that you're still going to have intergranular corrosion.
Okay.
Electrolysis is set in, and there's ways, the state of the arts today is you can prevent that situation from reoccurring.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Any other questions on good cause? Mr. Allen, did you have any other witnesses you wish to present on good cause?
No.
Okay. Mr. Tomasovic, I assume you have no witnesses for good cause?
No, we do not.
Thank you. Mr. Allen, if you'd like to give a brief closing on good cause, this would be a time to do that.
Okay, I'll be as brief as I can. First of all, we appreciate everyone's consideration. This is a difficult conundrum facing the client. They've got a problem. They've got a temporary fix. They know they need a more permanent fix, and they've got that available. So they're facing the issue of, do we trust to luck? The term possible was used here. The term likely was bandied about. It is at least possible that the temporary fix will hold until the time required to notice and hear a short variance. It's equally possible, and I didn't hear my witness say probable that it will fail. But we have the opportunity to avoid failure. We have the clamp. It's ready to be installed, although we've asked for anywhere from, I think, 24 hours to 3 days. The best estimates are it will take 8 hours to put that clamp on, and that will solve and eliminate the possibility of failure or the probability of failure. And that seems a reasonable alternative, certainly reasonable in opposition to doing a shutdown now in the event it did fail and then having to start up again. But I think also, and we've all been painfully aware of disasters and unexpected events that occurred because of the failure to implement a change, an engineering change, a design change. This is a change that can be readily done with minimal additional insult to air quality. We've quantified that. It can be done by Friday, or we can all sit back and wait and hope that the possible or the probable or the likely doesn't nuance and occur. It's a difficult situation. It's difficult for you as board members. It's difficult for my client. And of course, we're all going to be judged with that wonderful hindsight quality, which is always perfect 20/20 vision. My client would like to proceed, would like to put that clamp on, and sleep better at night and know that they're not going to have the problem for their own peace of mind, for the peace of mind of Chevron, their customer, and for the citizens as well. It seems like a reasonable thing to do, although admittedly right now, it's difficult to make out an argument that we are presently in violation of any regulation, or any district rule, or any permit condition, other than the generic conditions that basically say, maintain your plant and equipment and operate in general compliance. A Band-Aid or in this case, epoxy, is not optimum. It may or may not work. It possibly could fail. It likely could fail. But it's not optimum. So in that sense, I suppose an argument could be made that we are in violation. We did fail to correct, of course, under 1173G, Table 1, the initial problem within the 24 hours. But I think it's a difficult situation, and we appreciate the difficulty. And it's, should we wait till we fail? Should we give the notice, or should we move ahead? We would very much like to move ahead. That clamp is there. It's ready to be installed, and it can be done in all likelihood by the end of the week. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Mr. Tomasovic, your closing on good cause.
I concur with much of what Mr. Allen said in terms of the exigencies that are present with this line. It's mostly a steam line, so of course a temporary fix or a Band-Aid is not optimal, and a robust fix makes sense to put in place. The need to find whether or not there's good cause is something that is to the board's discretion, and in this case, based on fact-specific circumstances, if there's any area of misgiving, it might be basically the other end of the fact that it is a steam line that doesn't really pose much of an issue in terms of excess emissions, which is, will the denial of the interim variance result in drastic conditions? And we had heard that it wouldn't pose a safety problem, and the excess emissions would be somewhat minimal. So of all the factors, that one seems perhaps the least compelling, and I'm sure that is something you can take into account alongside all the other aspects of it. But in terms of whether they were diligent in seeking out recourse through variance proceedings, that's not an area that, from our perspective, warrants much scrutiny. And whether it's an interim variance under the proposed conditions we have today, or a short variance under much the same proposed conditions, we would like to see this more robust fix put in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Board members, before we begin the discussion on whether we can find good cause, I just want to remind ourselves, remind the public, remind the parties why it is we bifurcate in situations of either emergency or interim variances, is because there has been no notice to the public. And we are a public board, and we hold public notice very high, and that's why there are such stringent factors that need to be demonstrated to this board in order to move forward without that public notice and opportunity for the public to therefore be heard. In certain circumstances, it seems more important, and in some it seems less important, but that's not for us to determine whether public notice is important or not. It always is of the same importance. And with that, I wanted to start with the one I have hesitation on, and that is I do have trouble finding good cause. Not that this could not have been avoided. I don't know, maybe others feel that way as well, or feel differently. But I don't see even the first finding. There is no violation. I know Mr. Allen valiantly tried to find his client in violation of something, but the initial violation of going over 4 hours, that's not what we're here for, to determine for a variance. You can't have a variance retroactively anyway. And there is no violation that has been demonstrated. imminent violation, I don't find either. The epoxy was applied on May 24th, or the 23rd. The decision was made to put this clamp on the 24th. If it was so imminent that the epoxy would fail, then I don't understand why it took a week for a petitioner to file for variance relief. Usually, we consider sometimes waiting simply days might not be considered exercising diligence when, if they believe that it was likely to occur that the epoxy would fail. And I did not hear compelling testimony that that is imminent. I also didn't hear testimony or evidence that epoxy could not be reapplied. And again, it's not that this clamp fix isn't the better fix. Clearly it is. It's just whether or not we're willing to put aside public notice to have it fixed sooner, and whether we believe that the findings that we need to make are present. And for those reasons, I don't, and I don't believe there's any unavoidable adverse impact to petitioner or likely adverse impact to the environment to wait until that short variance because they're still operating. So there's no losses. Those are my thoughts. Senator?
I think I can find a good cause. Number one, you have corrosion at the joint. Epoxy will not, it's a temporary fix. The time for which it will last is not yet determined, but it's likely to occur at any time. Just understanding the mechanics of the process. And that's important to make a finding here today. You understand, and I asked you a question about electrolysis, yet you understand that. When you study it in title to its entirety, intergranular corrosion is rust. When two similar metals are brought together at that joint, and you have rust at the joint, which you mentioned, rust, corrosion, and you try to fix it with epoxy, that's going to fail. It could fail tomorrow, a week from now, but it's not going to last at time. The time won't be as it were when it's permanently put together, earlier put together. So that's a failure in the making. And for that reason, and of course, it provides tremendous service for the people in Southern California. Clean gasoline. So, should you have a failure between now and June 14th, you get some pollution based on the numbers you've given us, then that's not a good thing either. I'm saying, personally, I'd rather be safe than sorry. Knowing about this system as I do, as you explained it, based on background information, I'd rather prevent the problem than to react after it occurs to the extent it had an adverse effect on the environment and on production of clean gasoline for this area. So I'm willing to go for good cause.
Anyone else? Mr. Balagopalan?
Yeah, I believe I can find good cause too. They did notify the district through the 1-800 cut smoke line when the incident occurred. They reported the leak in a timely manner, and I think we had testimony. They called next day to the clerk of the board about filing a variance. So they took the necessary steps. So we're not discussing the merits of why they delayed that, but I think they took the steps necessary to file for a variance. And I think I agree with the Senate. I think the sooner the clamp is put in place, the better it is of preventing further leaks and further emission. and startup and shutdown will, as Mr. Cox indicated, will actually result in more emissions. So they will be in violation when they have to do the cut the leg, the dead leg, sorry, the dead leg to put the clamp. So they and I think we heard testimony on the emissions, even though they're kind of low because it's not a high intensity vapor line. It's mostly water, and they're removing some of the dissolved gases. But there still be emissions during that period. So
We haven't gotten to that yet. That's actually,
yeah.
But
All right, so I think I can find good cause, because the sooner that the repair is made, the better it is to prevent further leaks.
but you're basing imminence of violation on when they actually perform under the variance?
No,
It would have to be waiting and the failure of the epoxy.
I think the epoxy is a temporary fix. It could fail tomorrow, or because the steam could be melting it out, or So, and Mr. Cox wasn't sure that reapplying epoxy is something that they can do until he checks with his contractor. But so I think that's the potentially any time, between now and until we hear the noticed hearing, they could be a failure. So I think the steps they've taken, I think it appears on the 24th, they ordered the clamp to be put on the unit, and we heard that they couldn't do it. It had to be custom made, so it took some time to get that made. So I think that's another reason why it got delayed. So for that reason, I can find good cause for them to proceed as soon and as practical as possible to fix the problem.
May I, I'm sorry, Ms. Bird, I know you want to be heard, but I just want to read, based on that last point you had from our guidance that we follow on our good cause findings, and it's petitioners who take days or weeks to conduct testing programs, attempt remedies, confer with vendors, consult experts, meet with attorneys, and so forth, prior to filing for the variance are not usually considered to be exercising diligence for purposes. So we do not encourage petitioners to get your ducks in a row before filing. We take public notice seriously. So I caution us to not use that as a rationale for finding good cause.
Yeah, and I think mitigating is the fact that they called the clerk of the board and were, told that because there's no more violation.
That is not in evidence.
That's not, based on what the
But
petitioner.
what was in evidence is that they called for a different reason. It was that the leak was still occurring and they did not believe it would be within the 24 hours. It's whether or not they were diligent in filing for the clamp to cut and vent to atmosphere for the clamp. Ms. Bird and then Senator.
I believe I can find good cause. And as far as the date goes, I am considering the fact that I know our guidance says that you shouldn't take days and weeks and consult outside people, but they had within their permit an allowance of 24 hours to get a repair, and I think that it's reasonable to believe that they might do that if you've got a leak, that you might take that 24 hours that's allowed to you in the permit to get a repair. And I also, now the timing is not quite as, the timing's probably on the border of what I might say would be good cause. And I say that because this was a Friday that they were doing this, and the week after there was a holiday on that Monday, even though the district is closed all the time on Mondays anyway. I believe that it might have been difficult to go through the chain of getting approvals that was mentioned by the witness to get things done quicker, even using outside companies to come in or what have you, in the case where there's a holiday during that week. So I do believe that I can find good cause to hear it.
Senator?
Right. They discovered the leak on the 23rd. They notified Southern California AQMD district on that day or shortly thereafter. certainly before the 24th. But on the 24th, they discovered another leak. When they brought their engineers in to study the problem, they identified the corrective action that should be taken. They were on this, and they gave notice in the petition as the action that they took. The clamps, as it was stated, is not an off-the-shelf item. That means that you have to take the measurements and fabricate the part. It's got to be made. That takes time. If you can do it before June 3rd, I guess not, because you changed it to June the 14th. So that's really expediting the parts that's required to fix the problem in a reasonable amount of time. I understand what you're going through with. I've been there and done that. So I know what it takes to get it done. This fix is necessary this way, though it may be called temporary. It's a tough fix. It's good. And we want some clean gasoline in Southern California. Some of us still drive cars with a little gas in
Thank you.
it. So
I don't question, and I'm going to stop and allow someone to make a motion, but I don't question whether or not we heard that it's the best fix or that they were diligent in moving forward with that fix. I question whether or not we should have been here at the end of the month having a noticed hearing as opposed to determining now without notice to the public, and I disagree. But I hear 3 votes in favor, so if anyone would like to make a motion.
I'll make a motion. In the matter of Air Liquide 5705-8, I move that we can hear this interim hearing with absence of notice to the public for good cause.
Is there a second?
all right.
Senator seconds. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Mr. Balagopalan, how do you vote?
Yes.
I vote no. Senator, you vote
I vote twice, aye.
yes. And Ms. Byrd votes.
Yes.
Motion passes 3-1. We're going to take a short break, and we'll come back with whatever we need to wrap up the merits. But before we take the break, let's make sure we are in agreement that we will incorporate the evidence and the testimony from the good hearing portion of the hearing today. Mr. Allen, you agree?
Yes, stipulated.
Mr. Tomasovic?
Yes.
Okay. And we'll come back and there's probably just a few things we'll have to wrap up that we did not hear on the good cause.
Well, thank you.
So that we can look at it while we're on break, we have received proposed variance conditions, and we will mark that as Exhibit A as an apple. And we will go off the record until 10:45, and we'll be back. We're off the record.
Stretch.
We're back on the record, and as we stated before we left on break, we're going to come back now with the merits, the hearing on the merits with regard to an interim variance. And Mr. Allen, if you have anything to add in an opening statement with regard to the 6 findings that we need to make for a variance.
I do not have anything further to add with respect to the 6 findings. I'm ready to just resume my examination of the witness.
Before you do that, I'm going to come to Mr. Sorry, Mr. Tomasovic for any opening you might have on the merits.
Thank you. You've already marked Exhibit A, and these are proposed conditions that were shared prior to the hearing with the petitioner, and we'll come back to those. One area of potential uncertainty that we hope to pin down through their testimony and our own is the issue of excess emissions. We're unable to fully validate and concur in the pounds per hour amount that they came up with. However, our own witness, using different information sources, was able to come up with a slightly higher number of half a pound per hour, but this is a upper bound, worst case kind of number. So we suggest that should be considered in that context, in particular alongside this notion that either the variance is granted to allow the venting to open air, or they would be facing the consequences, I guess, of the shutdown, which has other impacts on the facility. They did reference excess emissions that come from a startup after a shutdown. So all of these things the board may well want to consider together. And that is all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Tomasovic. Mr. Allen, can you, before you reintroduce your witness, can you just clarify for us exactly what you're looking for? Because we had heard mentioned an 8-hour period. We also heard 3 days from today and through June 14th. And so it's very important for us to know precisely the amount of time you are asking for the variance to be in violation in terms of emitting directly to atmosphere.
Right, yes, thank you. And our apologies, there is an error in section 24 of the variance application, that's page 10, in which it states that we're requesting the variance to begin May 24 and that we expect to achieve compliance by June 3. To the extent we need the variance to start on May 24, because that was a violation that's now gone and passed, fine. We actually need from the day the variance is hopefully granted today to June 14. That's the date we're requesting. That would be Friday if I've done my math right. Is that Friday?
Okay, so you're asking us to consider this in light of 3 days' worth of constant emissions.
That would be the worst case scenario. Eight hours is the optimum. but-
And I don't mean to bring you into testifying. I just wanted to have an understanding, and then we
Right.
can bring in
No,
the witness.
I'll ask the witness to confirm that, but that's our understanding.
Okay.
That's not a function of time to do the work, it's the time to get the contractor out there. So I don't want the board under the impression that during that entire interval, the line will be cut and the steam condensate will be venting to atmosphere. Nothing gets cut and nothing gets done until the contractor comes out. But they could come out, they could drop the valve, and then, have to restart. We know they can do this by June 14.
Okay, well, let's have some testimony then on that.
All right. Okay, and again, back on the record?
Oh, yes, we've been on the record.
Okay, good. Again, I want to incorporate all of the witnesses' prior testimony per the board's suggestion and have that as part of the record on this part of the hearing. So we've got the background, we've got all the information regarding your position and your technical training and your experience with the facility and how the leak occurred, et cetera, and the current conditions. I would like you to describe for the board what's involved in placing the clamp on the well, assuming you proceed with that. And by that, how long does it take? What's involved? When will you start and when will you be completed? Just please explain to the board what you intend to do if you're allowed the opportunity to proceed under this interim variance.
Okay. So before any work can be done, the vent line has to be taken out of service. Thus meaning what we're going to have to do is actually isolate that line, that portion of the line in and of itself, so that it's not live. So that will take a certain amount of time to actually do the proper isolation of that line itself. And so when that process begins, we are going to be venting to atmosphere. So that vent gas is no longer being routed to the furnace anymore. It will be venting to atmosphere, as shown in the drawings of the vent to safe location at the top of the degasifier, or the V107.
And when would that start?
We will, if we're granted, we will call Colt. I mean, right after this. I'm thinking most likely they'll probably be able to start tomorrow morning. And then, at that point, once the line is taken out of service, and at that point we are venting, they will cut the dead leg off. The clamp in and of itself, it comes in two halves. In the pictures, it's one full piece, but it's actually two halves, so they can actually separate it. And then they will install it around the elbow, the 90-degree elbow, and they will bolt it up. And then one of the last steps is actually injecting sealant into the clamp, into the void areas of the clamp in and of itself.
That clamp is Exhibit 4, is that correct?
Yes, it's Exhibit 4.
And how long does it take to actually put that clamp on and put the sealant in and then leave the scene?
Yeah, so I would say the isolation amount of time would be like 1 or 2 hours, and then the clamp installation and injection of sealant would be roughly like 6 to 8 hours. So that's where we're getting the 8 to 10 hour time frame in order to install the clamp.
And what do they do to assure themselves the clamp has been properly installed?
Yes. Oh, that's a good question. So once the clamp is installed, we put the line back into service, and they just monitor the clamp to make sure it's holding, nothing's leaking. You do need some back pressure put on that clamp, and that's just, like I said, to ensure that the clamp is doing its job, which is to stop the leak.
Now, the district, of course, has concerns with respect to how much VOC in particular is going to be emitted during this process. Have you made any effort to estimate the amount of the VOCs?
Yes. So I am referencing a source test that was done back in 2014. I'm guessing that John's going to hand it out to you all.
The clerk has stepped out.
Yeah, she stepped out. If we can just wait a moment, I'm going to give her an exhibit, which will probably be number 8, if I'm keeping track.
Oh, let's wait until we actually receive it.
Yeah, let's wait. Oh, here she comes. Yeah. So I'm going to present this to you as I believe it's exhibit number 8. And ask the witness first to identify what it is. Allow them an opportunity to get
8,
that,
Okay.
Mr. Cox, and then we'll. Did I hand this to you?
Go up to
You did. You did.
Go up to 6. Go up to 6. Okay. I believe we're up to exhibit 6.
Oh, only 6, okay, good.
Okay, hold on. The board has received a chart entitled Source Test Results, and we're going to mark this as Exhibit 6, number 6.
And Mr. Cox, what is this Exhibit 6 that we've now provided the board for their review?
Okay. So what you have in front of you are the source test results that were done by a third-party contractor named Almega Environmental.
And when were they done?
This was done in 2014, December.
Has this been submitted to anyone?
I do not believe so.
Okay. So this is a document prepared, you said Almega, who is that?
Omega, they are a third-party contractor. They do a lot of our RADA testing and Rule 1189 and things of that nature. They monitor any excess emissions out of our. We have a couple process vents, and they are the ones that are responsible for helping calculate those emissions and preparing those reports.
And what is this data that is presented on this document titled Source Test Results?
Yes, so at the top of the V107, where it says the vent to safe location, Omega back in 2014 actually measured the amount of VOCs that were being emitted. And so as you can see, they did 3 runs, run 1, 2, and 3. and stack.
Is that indicating December 19th, 2014, month, day,
Yes,
and year?
yes, exactly. That is month, day, year. And you can see the stack parameters right underneath that. And so the value that we are using in terms of the pounds per hours is in the very bottom right of the table under average. It says 0.0816.
That's for VOC mass emissions?
Yes, that is for VOC mass emissions. And just to, I guess, to kind of show you how they got there, they were able to measure the concentrations. And so what they did is they added the TOC, the total organic carbon concentration on the front. They added the number that's, they added the front that's corrected to the bias factor. And then they added that to the back concentration, which is added to the bias, which is corrected to the bias factor. And then they added the VOC concentration in the gaseous phase to get the total VOC concentration. So that's the figure that says 6,367, the average on the bottom right.
And what is that, parts per million of what?
That's parts per million of carbon as methanol, as methanol. And then there's a calculation that is done in order using that 6,367 to arrive at the 0.0816 pounds per hour.
And just to be clear for the board's deliberations, that's the amount of pounds per hour of VOC that would be admitted to atmosphere if you didn't vent through the VO17 line to the heater furnace H101.
Yes, that is correct. It is important to note, too, that during this time frame when this testing was done, we were at a hydrogen production rate of around 83.5 million standard cubic feet per day, which is a little bit higher than we're running right now, which is around 80. So I'd like to mention that maybe this 0.0816 is a little bit overstated.
So you're relatively comfortable that this does reflect the amount of fugitive excess VOC?
Yes.
Will that exceed the amount you are authorized under your current permit?
Yes, so just based on that factor, we will surpass the 0.5 pound per day limit that we have on our permit condition, hence the reason for this variance.
Do you have a back of the envelope estimate for how many pounds per day, assuming it takes more than 24 hours?
Yes, so if we are able to actually do this work within that 8 to 10 hour time frame at most, we will be emitting 0.8 pounds, total pounds of VOCs.
And by that, if it took 24 hours, would it be 2.4 pounds?
Yeah, it would be around, I think we'll say 2.1, 2.2 if we ended up using the full 24 hours.
And if you were not given a variance and you had to shut down and restart, I know you testified previously there would be no incremental benefit to air quality. In fact, there would be a detriment. Did you quantify that? Can you quantify that detriment?
Yeah, so I referenced 3 pounds of VOCs, and that was in reference to a startup and shutdown that we experienced back in January due to a lightning strike. That was a hot startup, so it didn't take a terrible amount of time. But beyond that, we did but the flare gases amounted to around 5,000 K-scuff, so 1,000 standard cubic feet total. So that's beyond the VOCs.
Would this startup and shutdown and startup that you would have to employ here if you didn't have the variance necessitate a hot startup or a cold startup?
Most likely it would be a cold startup, just due to the amount of time needed to actually install the clamp.
So there would be more than 3 pounds per day?
Yes, there would potential be for more than 3 pounds, and that's not even including the economical effects.
So that's your basis for concluding that the closing or shutdown would not produce a benefit, would produce a detriment?
Yes.
Okay, understood. And again, you testified previously you'd given consideration to curtailing operations in lieu of obtaining a variance. Is that the case?
Yes.
And I believe you've said this, but for the record, you are amenable to the proposed conditions that were offered by the district?
Yes. Yes.
And again, during the variance, you're going to abide by those conditions to reduce emissions?
Yes, absolutely.
Continue to run at 80 million standard cubic feet per
Yeah,
day?
yeah, no more than 80 million, yes.
What about monitoring? What kind of monitoring or emission quantification will you enact or undertake during the period that this variance is granted, if it is granted?
If it is granted, we would just use these source test results and then base it off the amount of time that we are actually venting to atmosphere.
So you'll use engineering calculations to come up with a figure for the excess VOCs?
Yes.
And again, just very briefly, because I think this is in the record, the impact if the petition were denied and you had a failure of the line, what would you have to do then?
We have failure of the line, we would have to shut down. And as I've mentioned, that would come at a great economical detriment to not only Air Liquide, but also Chevron, since we are their main supplier of high-purity hydrogen.
Has Air Liquide received any complaints from the public regarding the operation of either this equipment or its facility in the last 6 months?
No, I think part of the reason is that we are within the Chevron refinery complex in the middle of it.
How does that play? I'm not sure I understand that.
Oh, that's fine. So just based on our location, since we're within Chevron, I guess we're far enough from the public to.
So you don't get complaints?
No, so no
What
complaints.
about from Chevron?
No complaints from Chevron.
And what about during the period the interim variance commences? Are you anticipating any complaints from the public?
No, not at all.
And have there been any complaints from Chevron or maybe Air Liquide employees or others with respect to odors associated with your operations?
No, not at all.
Has Air Liquide received any notice of violation from the South Coast in connection with its operations of the V107
No.
or the plant in general?
There was I guess not a notice of violation, but there was something tied to a reclaim dealing with, I guess, credits, NOx credits, but it wasn't tied to this V107 vent line.
Thanks. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Tomasova, questions for Mr. Cox?
Can you speak to what the economic effects of a 12-hour shutdown might be?
Shutdown would be longer than 12 hours. I would say that if we had to shut down, it was a high startup, you're looking at more closer to 24 hours. And that's where the 250 to 500K figure comes into play. For 24 hours, I would expect it to be on the lower end, closer to 250. If anything longer than that, that's when you're looking at 500,000 or even more than that, possibly. And that's just its effect on Air Liquide. Chevron would be affected as well, and I don't know the figures on Chevron's side.
You mentioned the 5,000 standard cubic feet of flare gas that would be needed for a startup. Mm-hmm. Is there anything notable about the consistency of that flare gas in terms of, is it like a pipeline grade or does it have other?
So the flare gas is mainly the stuff that would normally be sent to Chevron. So you're looking at some carbon monoxide, hydrogen, but it's mainly hydrogen, I would say, that's being flared.
And do you have any calculations for that might quantify excess emissions from burning 5,000 standard cubic feet in terms of NOx or any other?
I believe I do. I don't have it with me. We do have like a spreadsheet that we use to calculate the amount of emissions whenever we have any flaring events. And I'm getting those figures from, we do a SCAR report. I think it's a part of Rule 1118, flare monitoring. So whenever we have any flare events, we have to report those.
And what pollutants do you report with flare events?
NOx, SOx, I believe those are the main ones, NOx and SOx.
Do you know, since a startup would implicate a few tons per day, is there another part of your permit separate from S2.1 that speaks to an alternate limit that applies for startups?
I know during startups, once we start lighting burners, we have a 24-hour time limit. So it's a 24-hour clock in order for us to get hydrogen into the pipeline. So in order for us to start sending. So I know that for sure that is a requirement. We do have a 24-hour time period to do that. But beyond that, I'm not sure.
And the source test results marked as exhibit number 6, would it be accurate to say these are more top-line results and that there's a full report that was completed?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have searched for the full report, and I'm not exactly sure if a full report is actually done. Reason for that is the V107 vent line is not a part of our normal, I guess, reporting routine. Since it is being routed to H101, we don't normally test emissions from V107. I think this, in 2014, this was done as a way to check to see what are we actually emitting instead of, and actually getting some numbers actually put to that. So that's, and I've contacted Omega to see if they had a full source test result or like the calculations. I do know that in terms of the TOC concentrations, there's an AQMD method, is method 5.1 that was used to calculate the TOC concentrations, the front and back methods. And then method 25.3 was used to calculate the VOC concentrations in the gaseous phase.
So was exhibit number 6 found among your records exactly as it appears?
Yes, yeah, exactly as it appears. This, I mean, this is like the format that Omega uses when they send us source test results. So it hasn't been, I guess, modified or anything like that.
Pass the witness.
Board members, questions? Mr. Balagopalan?
Mr. Cox, let me go back to the source test. Do you know, so this test was done when the reformer was not in operation?
This test was done when the reformer was in operation.
So this is the typical emissions when when it's working?
Yes, exactly, yes.
So not, okay, so this is a,
It's going to the furnace, though.
Say it again?
It's going to the furnace, right?
Yeah.
Make sure he understands.
Okay. Yeah, so like I said, normally this gas is going to the furnace. So this is what you're seeing is was normally being sent to the furnace.
so that, so in a 24-hour, would it exceed the half a pound?
Yeah, if you get that pound per hour, you multiply by 24, yeah, you're going to exceed the half a pound.
Which then normally you would be exceeding the permit condition then.
No, it's going to the furnace.
Oh, well, so I'm sorry. I just want to clarify. This is normally being routed to the furnace. This is what's being thermally destructed. So, normal operation, we are not venting this stream into atmosphere.
So this test was done when it was not vented to the reformer then?
Yes, exactly. So yes, for a certain amount of time, this was done while it was being vented. But this is not like normally what's happening in normal operation. Normally operation, it is being sent to the furnace to be thermally destructed. So this is not what's being emitted to atmosphere as we speak.
Okay. And the stacked moisture content purports to what you say, it's a very high, 99% average water, so it's mostly.
Oh yeah, it's mainly steam. Yes.
When do you operate? When does the gas go to the through this bypass?
When does it go to the vent?
To the vent, yeah.
Normally it doesn't. Only time it would be venting is if you're ever taking the line out of service.
And how often did that happen? Is it during the turnaround, or even normally, sometime you have to do that?
I would say did not happen during it's not happen during startups or shutdowns. So this is normally if we ever, like I said, need to take the line out of service for whatever reason. If we ever have to do any repairs on the vent line itself, that's when that vent is used.
So can you look at condition number 7 in the, condition number 10, actually, in the Exhibit A?
Okay. Oh, okay. Okay.
So can you, because you did it, sometimes you do have to vent it. It says this shall not vent, after the repair is completed. Would that hold if you're at times you may have to do that, right?
Yeah, so I think this line number 10 is referring to the fact that once we do complete once we have the clamp installed, the vent line will be put back into service, and so we will not be. This will be possible. We will not be venting the V107 deaerator vent gas to atmosphere after the repair is complete. That is true.
No, you would not vent, but you indicated there sometimes when, due to repairs, you have to vent to the vent.
Yes.
Bypass vent.
Yeah, so we're going to have to vent, which is part of this variant. We're going to have to vent while we're putting the clamp.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah.
But this one says after the repair is completed, you cannot vent 107 to the atmosphere, but there
Yeah.
will be instances where you will vent it to the atmosphere.
During normal operation, like I said, we do not vent the atmosphere.
All right,
Yeah.
normal okay, thank you. Oh, just head
Yeah,
up.
yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to reiterate that it's part of our permit to not vent this gas into atmosphere
During normal,
during normal operation. Exactly.
but
So,
the
I'm sorry.
repairs, it allows you to do that during repair and so forth.
Yeah. So yes, during repairs, and that's part of the reason for this variance is that we have to have approval in order to vent this gas into atmosphere, because due to our permit conditions, we are not allowed to vent this gas to atmosphere due to our permit.
And your petition actually referred to Table 2. And do you have the rule which, for 1173 Table 2 by any chance?
I don't have it. We handed out a copy of permit condition E336.1, and that's before you as Exhibit 1, I believe. In that pile, you'll see
Exhibit
permit condition
5.
5? One day I'll get those numbers right.
If you need them to refer to the rule, I believe the rule books are
Yeah.
right there on the
But
shelf.
that section as well says that you have to vent the V107 line to the heater, and it's H101.
Actually, I was referring to Table 2 because of the time period, and I think because you cannot meet the 1 calendar day, you also, to do any leak greater than 25. So I'm trying to figure out which of the categories, there are 3 categories for 1 calendar day. Are you exceeding 25,000 ppm? Have you measured the leaks by any, to find out what the concentration is at the leaks?
In terms of concentration of the leaks, no.
No. So which of the 3 really applies to you in the rule? Do you mind, I think we have the,
Yeah, you can get, I think if you're asking with respect to the relief from Rule 1173G1, Table 2,
Yes.
that was with respect to the affecting of the initial repairs when the line was initially observed to be leaking. It's not a going forward variance
Right.
that
Oh,
we're
okay.
requesting.
All right.
Does that answer?
yeah, okay,
Thank you.
all right, thank you.
Okay, sorry for the
Okay,
misunderstanding. Yeah.
Just, I know you mentioned that the dead leg, you didn't know the reason for that, and do you see any issue are you investigating before removing that, or it's a determination made that it's not needed?
Yeah, so, internally with our MOC approvers and also with code, we've, it's one of those things where if you see it, you'll realize, but it's, like I said, it's providing like no support. And I think it was initially put in place to provide support the weight of the V107 vent line, but it's just not bracing against anything. So we feel very confident that removing it is not going to pose any hazards or anything like that by cutting it off.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Bird?
In condition number 1, it refers to the reports and it refers to purchases. Has everything been purchased for this equipment? So everything's purchased and everything's on site already?
Yes, everything's been
Okay.
purchased, fabricated. We're just talking about the installation portion.
And just for confirmation, the source test that you're referring to from 2014, that's the last source test that was done?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I had some questions. First of all, I just want to be clear, and this is not to catch you in anything, but
that's
I
fine.
want to define this properly. You intend to be complete by June 14th, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so you do not intend to actually apply for a short variance, which would mean not that you can't get a variance today, but that it would be an emergency variance that would be done within 30 days. Is that more appropriate? You're not asking for additional relief after June 14th?
No, we're not. That is true.
Okay.
That is true.
This is really just kind of picky, but I wanted to understand it. Is there an intention behind, I'm looking at condition 4, and it seems it's repetitive of 2 other conditions that are in the proposed variance conditions. It seems it's a combination of number 2 and number 5. Is there anything different that's meant to be relayed by 4? Is it better relayed through 4? Am I missing something that these are not?
I'm going to defer to the district to answer your question because I didn't write these.
The final part of condition number 4 just refers to the fact that if they happen to see other areas of the pipe needing to be addressed at the time that they are venting to air, that they should be in contact with the district about getting that done. It shouldn't, in other words, maximizing the time and the opportunity they have if they happen to notice a need to initiate additional repairs.
Okay, so do we need 2? Oh, I'm sorry, do we need 4? Wait, I'm sorry. 4 and 2 are, so the first part of it, minimize emissions to the atmosphere. So that's repetitive of number 5, is it not?
Yes, the first clause of 4 is repetitive of
So do
the
we
first
need,
sentence.
do we need 5? It just seems it's confusing if there's 2 that say the exact same thing. And the assumption would be that both are necessary and,
5, just looking at it now, 5 does appear to be more expendable of the 2. And
okay. And then also the last sentence of notifying the AQMD with 1 hour of initiating additional repairs, okay. Okay. Then the other question I had is, condition number 11 is to pay excess emission fees within 30 days from the date of final compliance, which would put it well outside the timing of the variance. And so my question for petitioner is, or for Mr. Cox, if you can answer it, can estimated excess emissions be paid? And of course, they always can be adjusted later before the end of this variance, which you've asked through June 14th.
If needed by check, I know normally we do. Okay, so yes, we could do that.
Okay, so we just change that date. And then, I'm sorry, but can you just remind us which particular, I see, is it on Exhibit 5? Can you just reiterate which conditions of the permit you are seeking the variance from?
Yes. Just a minute. That is permit condition S2.1, which limits the overall emissions from process equipment to 0.5 pounds per day. That's process 1, system 1 equipment. And permit condition E is an ECHO 336.1, which requires that all exhaust gases vent to the H101 furnace.
Okay, and just those 2?
Yes.
Plus E2 as well?
Yes,
Okay, the administrative E2, and then, okay, and that's it.
yes.
Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Cox? Senator, did you have any questions?
The proposed variance conditions are fairly straightforward. But we look at number 5, you have to, what action you're going to take to minimize emission during this period.
Well, the real thing we can do is just remain below the 80. As you increase production rate, you are going to increase emissions, and so they kind of go hand in hand. So just by remaining below 80, that will help reduce any emissions that are being vented to the atmosphere.
Okay. Number 9, you have to notify the district within 2 hours of completing the repairs. But you're almost done. Today is the 11th.
Yeah.
The 14th is Friday. When will you start putting the clamp in place?
Hopefully tomorrow. At least by tomorrow.
It's 12th.
It's the 12th, yeah.
You take a couple of days to do that and test.
I think usually when we put the line back in service, I mean, you can tell pretty quickly whether or not the clamp's going to hold. So I think it's possible to let them know before the 14th.
What if the clamp is not holding?
Say it again.
What if the clamp is not holding?
Well, if the clamp is not holding, I've never really experienced that, but if the clamp is not holding, then we'll probably have to take the line back out of service and try to install it again. Only way it would not hold is if for some reason the sealant was not injected properly and the steam is finding some way to escape.
What type of gasket material are you using between the clamp and the tube at that joint, at that elbow?
I'm not sure what the material of the gasket in and of itself.
There is a gasket when you think so?
Yeah, so they use like it's a packing rope. Is what they So they use a packing rope.
Call it a gasket, call it a rope.
Yeah,
Same
but
thing.
I'm not sure the exact material of it, honestly.
But have you used it before?
Yeah. We've used it before. I just can't recall the exact material.
But it has a history of doing the job.
Oh yeah. Coat. I mean, unfortunately, we've had quite a few leaks at our plant, and so we have several coats clamps at our site. We're very familiar with them. They've done work not only at our site, but like I said, mentioned at other plants. So we feel comfortable with
So the coat spec on that device is pretty satisfactory.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and before we do any, like I say, any installation of clamps or anything like that, we do have the management of change meetings where we do get approval from not only our plant manager, but the zone director, a subject matter expert, and so it did meet our conditions and it was deemed satisfactory.
Okay, onward and upward.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Mr. Allen, any other witnesses?
No other witnesses.
Okay, Mr. Tomasovic, you indicated you had a witness for excess emissions?
Yes. The respondent calls air quality engineer Patrick Lee. Good morning, Mr. Lee. Could you please state and spell your name for the record?
Good morning. My name is Patrick Lee. First name Patrick, last name Lee.
Have you taken the oath this morning?
I have.
What is your duty position with the district?
I am a AQ Engineer 1 for the refinery permitting team.
How long have you been employed by the district?
2 years in August.
And briefly, what is your educational background?
Bachelor of Science in Environmental Engineering from UCI.
And are you familiar with the Air Liquide facility at issue with this petition?
Yes.
And have you had the opportunity to look at what they had submitted for estimated excess emissions?
I have, yes.
And based on that and the, did you hear the testimony from Mr. Cox regarding these excess emissions?
Yes.
Is it your understanding that the 2014 source test was conducted without being required by any permit condition to do so?
Yes, that is my understanding.
And was it conducted without any approved source test protocol?
From what I understand, yeah.
And would it have been beneficial to you and your managers who look at excess emission calculations to be able to see more details about this particular 2014 source test?
Yes.
In the absence of that, have you been able to look to any other information sources to come up with a picture of excess emissions?
Yes, I was able to find a source test that seems like it was conducted back in 2005, also for the V107 vent to atmosphere.
And in before you get into sharing your calculations from that, um, other than the absence of more details from these 2014 source test results, do you have any reason to doubt the testimony of Mr. Cox as to calculations?
Could you repeat the question? Sorry.
Aside from lack of detail, do you have any reason to doubt or distrust what Mr. Cox had presented from his calculations?
No.
Okay. So could you, looking at these 2005 numbers you have, share what you came up with?
Yes, so the 2005 source test ended up with a significantly higher stack gas flow rate compared to the 2014 stack gas flow rate, but it also resulted in a lower concentration of VOCs. But if we end up using the higher concentration from the 2014 source test and combine that with the higher gas flow rate of the 2005 source test, then we can come up with a worst case scenario excess emissions of approximately 0.51 pounds an hour if they are venting to the atmosphere through V107.
And you say that's a worst case scenario. Would you also characterize that as an upper bound unlikely scenario?
Yes, I would.
So with all that, do you feel comfortable that emissions will most likely be lower than 0.5 pounds per hour?
Yes.
And regarding testimony we had heard on startup emissions, do you have any background or any kind of preparation to speak to those?
Unfortunately, I do not.
I pass the witness.
Mr. Allen, do you have any questions for Mr. Lee?
Yeah, just very, very few. So if I understand right, you took stack gas volume figures from 2005 and then compared them with data from 2014?
Correct.
Okay. How do you feel about that in terms of an accurate way to estimate? Is that a good way to do it?
That would be a worst case scenario. Likely would not be 100% accurate, but that again would be an upper bound of what could happen.
Do you have a best case scenario?
Best case scenario? Well, if we took the lowest number from both source tests and combined those together, I haven't run the numbers.
No ballpark, huh?
No.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Different line was used, the V107 line. Are you aware it was replaced in 2015?
Yes, the V107 vent line to H101 was replaced in 2015. But
What's your understanding? Was that a replacement to the current?
yes, that was a replacement to the current to replace carbon steel with 410 stainless steel.
Okay, I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Board members, any questions? Mr. Balagopalan?
Mr. Lee, do you know what the production rate was for hydrogen for the 2005 source tests?
The 2005 source test was conducted at a hydrogen production rate of 82.8 million standard cubic foot an hour.
So it was less than what he indicated, Mr. Cox indicated for the 2014 tests?
Yes.
Okay. So that number, 0.5, do you know if on the 2005 tests, what was the pound per hour? Not taking the concentration from the 2014, but just based on the results of the 2005 tests.
The 2005 test resulted in a emission rate of 2.55 pounds per day, which is approximately 0.11 pounds an hour.
So would that have violated the condition, permit condition at that time, or was that because it says it cannot exceed 0.5 pounds per day, or was that condition added later? Do you know?
I am not sure of the timeline of when the 0.5 pound per day permit condition was added.
But if it was there before, prior to 2005, then they would have violated the condition.
Correct.
And do you know if the district took any action based on that source test against the facility?
I believe they were allowed to vent to atmosphere from V107 prior, and the source tests showed that they had higher emissions than expected, and then that was why they are now routing V107 to H101.
Okay, so after that, they routed it to the reformer, basically.
Correct.
So so subsequently, then the emission is lower, well, can be lower, because they're not, they don't, the 2005 showed that there was quite a lot of, more than allowed going to the atmosphere. So by rerouting it, they've reduced the emission from 2005. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Senator?
Did you hear Mr. Cox explain how he thought the failure occurred at the joint level? You're sitting out there, right?
Yes, I was sitting in the back, yes.
You heard what he said, yes or no?
Yes. Yes.
What did he say? The cause of failure.
I think
Wait, please.
this witness is here for excess emissions. I'm not sure why
Well,
the question about, did he
Well,
hear that?
let me finish, then you maybe come clear to you. What did he say? Did he explain why he said he failed? Did he explain how to fix the problem?
Yes, he explained how he fixed the problem.
Or representing the district, are you satisfied with the approach he's taken would be a corrective action?
I'm not familiar exactly with how to repair lines.
Or is he not that kind of engineer?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Lee? Okay, Mr. Tomasovic, any other witnesses?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lee. Okay, so let me ask Mr. Allen if you'd like to give a closing statement.
Well, simply to say that I hope we've met the threshold, incorporating the testimony from earlier this morning as well as after the break, and we would very much like to get what we deem to be an appropriate fix in place before Friday, certainly by the end of business Friday. We hope, again, that we have demonstrated that the amount of excess emissions, quantified that. They will occur, of course, because once we take the V107 line and cut that dead leg off and are venting to atmosphere, they will occur. There's been considerable discussion about how much. The data that we provided to you, and I'm going to get this wrong because I have all morning, but I think it's Exhibit 6, that shows those source tests. That was indeed done by a third party. We believe those values are accurate and representative. But I think that the critical factor here is for us to get that clamp up there and avoid the possibility or the likelihood or the probability that that line will blow and create some concern to somebody and result in some other additional action. We think that proceeding diligently in that regard is in everyone's best interest and would like to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Mr. Tomasovic, your closing?
With regard to our Exhibit A, we would suggest the board might consider changing Condition 10. Currently, it says petitioner shall not vent the V107 deaerator to atmosphere after the repair is completed. And based on our understanding of permit conditions and testimony, we think it may be improved if it were to say along the lines of petitioner shall resume compliance with permit condition E336.1 after the repair is completed. Aside from that, it does appear that the criteria for a variance can be satisfied if the board chooses to do so. The excess emissions picture is a little bit more murky than ideal in terms of perhaps doing a shutdown and putting the clamp in place under those conditions is about as good emissions-wise as what they plan to do in terms of venting to atmosphere. And maybe there's areas of uncertainty in that, but under either scenario, the overall emissions appear to be very low. And so I think petitioner can lean on the point, if they choose to do so, that the economic effects of doing that kind of shutdown, that kind of operational impact is undesirable for them, and that they're motivated to complete this clamp installation process as quick as possible and bring things back up online until such time as they're able to do the full turnaround and replace the pipe entirely. Subject to the hearing board accepting the proposed variance conditions, including as modified in my closing here, the district will support the issuance of the variance.
Thank you. Board members, anyone wish to begin deliberation? Mr. Balagopalan?
I believe we can make the 6 findings and grant the, and I think, Madam Chair, you indicated it should be an emergency variance. Yeah, for the emergency variance. I'll go through the findings. The petitioner will be in violation of the permit condition E336.1 and S2.1, and I believe also E2 during the time they do the repairs. Right now, they've sealed it with epoxy, so there are no emissions, but when they cut the dead leg and put the flange, there will be emissions, and so they will be in violation of the permit condition. And I think conditions are due to beyond the reasonable control the leak occurred, and so they took all the steps necessary to reduce the emission. They sealed with the epoxy, and I think shutting down will be and closing the business would not. I would say it would be unreasonable, and we heard testimony that there would probably be more emissions for shutdown and startup. So the closing and would not be without a corresponding benefit in reducing air contaminants. And then they have looked at consideration to curtailing operation, which is what they've done. They have there's a solution to the leak problem. They have got the flange custom made and ready to go, and as we heard testimony, they can hopefully complete it within 6 to 8 or maybe up 10 hours, and then they will put in the flange, and they'll, which we heard as packing to reduce it. But in addition, I think we heard testimony they're going to put sealant that'll also encapsulate the unit, so hopefully there won't be any emissions. And excess emission, we had some discussion on that. I think the emissions either way is not going to be that significant, and it'll be below the minimum fee that they have to pay. So I think that, so I don't want to go into who had which is the better test, but I agree that the test given by the petitioner it doesn't have any background, there's no backup to it, so it's kind of a little, I'm not invalidating the test, but it's always good when you have the full package, and then you have a apples-to-apple comparison and it has a production rate and so forth. But either way, I think we heard testimony from Mr. Lee that test was done, at 2005, and that probably resulted in a condition that required them to vent from there to the reformer. So, and then and I think there are conditions on the various conditions that require them to monitor and notify the district. So I think, my mind, I think I can make the finding on all 6 of the various conditions. I'm sorry, I can make the 6 findings to grant for us to grant the emergency variance.
Thank you. Anyone else have thoughts? Ms. Bird? Sorry?
I agree that we can make all the findings. I think the significance, or one of the points that was made for me was, while epoxy repairs have been done on lines before, they're wrapped with fiberglass and they're on a straight line. Mm-hmm. This happens to be an elbow, and it's that use of that repair method on an elbow we don't know that it would hold up. So under that situation, I have some confidence that it's definitely beyond the reasonable control to expect that they could put in place a repair that would sustain a long period of time when they don't have experience with using it in that manner. So, but all the other points, I agree with my fellow board member, and I think we can make the findings.
I also believe we can make the findings. My only issue with good cause had to do with notice and waiting. So all those points that have been made, I agree with. I just wanted to add a couple things. I don't know, Mr. Balagopalan, if you mentioned, and maybe I just got lost a little bit, that the loss, if they would have to, they could shut down and do this repair, and the loss would be about $250,000, I believe, and then the startup emissions. And so I think, given the relatively small emissions venting to atmosphere, that is clearly outweighs those emissions. And curtailment, I believe, is not an option, because that you can't curtail well, you could shut down, and we just said that that would be significant. So they considered the only curtailment in lieu of a variance would be to shut down completely, which would have detrimental impacts. Oh, and I also wanted to say, beyond reasonable control, that the pipe had been replaced, I understand, in 2015. And so it's relatively newer. Any other thoughts? Okay. Mr. Balagopalan, would you like to make a motion?
Sure. Give me a second, let me get that. Okay, I'll go ahead and make the motion. In the matter of Air Liquide Large Industries US, case number 5705-8, I move that we grant an emergency variance commencing today and continuing through June 14th from permit conditions E2, E336.1, and S2.1 for the equipment located at 324 West El Segundo Boulevard in El Segundo. And this petition is for them to do repairs to the vent, not the vent pipe, the line, the vent line that goes to the reformer from the V107 unit. The conditions of the variance are set forth in Exhibit A with some changes that Mr. Thomas Selvig had proposed that we, and did we agree to take out number 5? I'm sorry, Ms. Buzak, because it was.
If you so wish to incorporate it into your,
I think Mr. Bryan, you didn't have an issue with that. So
except the only, if you don't mind, since we're talking about it, the only thing that would be left out is to document those actions. So on the second line where it says petitioner shall conduct all repairs as expeditiously as possible, maybe, I'm sorry, to 4.
Oh, 4. Oh.
To 4, I apologize. To 4, the second line, petitioner shall conduct all repairs as expeditiously as possible. We may consider adding and document such actions, which is the only thing that would be now missing from 5.
Okay. Do you want me to repeat? Okay, then we would remove condition number 5, and then condition number 10 will be modified to say, to indicate after the repairs is completed, petitioner shall not vent 107 derailleur in violation of permit condition E336.1. And I think I'm rephrasing it, but okay, shall resume compliance with condition E336.1
So petitioner shall resume compliance with permit condition E336.1 after the repair is completed.
completed on the V107 derailleur. Petitioner shall pay all applicable fees to the clerk of board. I'm not sure how many days,
June 14th, by June 14th.
by June 14th. And petitioner shall also notify the clerk of board in writing when final compliance is achieved. That I'll end my motion.
I'll second the motion. And would you characterize excess emissions as to be determined, but to be between, estimated to be between 0.08 and 0.51 pounds per hour of VOC?
Yes. Point
Between 0.08
.08.
and 0.51 pounds per hour. That's the lower limit and the higher limit. Any discussion on the motion? Ms. Byrd?
I just had one little word to remove from number 1, and that's purchase. All purchases have been made. So their documentation has to do with addressing fabrication installation, but not purchases.
Is that acceptable, Mr. Balagopalan?
Yes.
It's acceptable to me as well. So that change will be made and the word purchase will be deleted. Any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Senator, how do you vote? Ms. Byrd, how do you vote?
Yes.
I vote yes. And Mr. Balagopalan?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 4-0. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any other business other than our training, which has been greatly delayed, before we adjourn? Okay, we're going to adjourn our hearing, and we will take up our training in CC8. We are adjourned.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, did.
Eat our meal and then go back.
No, grab